He has no lawful authority to do so. It would require an act of Congress for him to do so. But that's not going to stop Donald Trump declaring war on Venezuela and, by extension, much of Latin America, certainly the masses of Latin America, if not their increasingly fascistic governments. It is a black eye for me, for sure. I said as recently as last evening to my good friend Jackson Hinkle that I thought that Trump was bluffing, was blinding us to something else that was going to happen. But I, as George Bush would put it, underestimated Donald Trump's madness, about which more later. According to Tucker Carlson, who definitely should know, he was briefed yesterday that in the presidential address to be given later this evening in the United States, Donald Trump is going to declare a state of war with Venezuela. May God help the people of Venezuela, and may God help the soldiers, sailors, and airmen that Donald Trump orders in to do his bidding, because mass casualty event it definitely will be. And it will not be a short war, and it will not be decided by who's in the presidential palace in Caracas. As Mr. Churchill once put it, that would not be the beginning of the end. That would merely be the end of the beginning. It will be guerrilla war. It will be guerra prolongada. It will be a prolonged war fought in the cities, in the towns, in the villages, in the hamlets, in the mountains, in the jungles, and on the beaches. The Venezuelan people will never surrender to the overbearing arrogance of this lunatic, Donald J. Trump. Why do I say lunatic? Because I read his address, which could only be described as a presidential address, on Truth Social last night, in which, inter alia, he says that he has now blockaded Venezuela completely, and that the country is completely surrounded, and that the blockade will soon be joined by more ships, and it will not end until, and I'm quoting this one directly, until Venezuela returns all the oil and all the land that they have stolen from the United States of America. If that's not Amendment 25 territory, I don't know what is. Donald Rumsfeld famously opined that it wasn't America's fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries. That was actually a more logical framing, formulation than what Trump wrote last night. Trump is claiming Venezuela's oil as his own, and he's claiming Venezuelan land as his own. Well, in a way, he did everybody a favor by that formulation, because if there is one thing guaranteed to maximize the resistance and opposition to the war that is now imminent, it is the claim that the United States owns the land of Latin America. Never mind the oil, but the land under which the oil is to be found. Nothing could turn this more obviously into a patriotic war. It's now guaranteed to send a beacon throughout Latin America. And they're quite good at guerra prolongada, you know. They're quite good guerrilla fighters, the Latin American peoples. After all, thanks to American support for military and fascist dictatorship throughout Latin America, all of my lifetime, they've had to fight their way to anything resembling a democracy. They had to fight their way to one in Colombia. They had to fight their way to one, and many times in Venezuela. They had to fight their way to one in Argentina, in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Brazil. The people had to fight this guerra prolongada, and they ultimately triumphed. and they will triumph also in Venezuela. As I said, it will merely be the beginning of the end if Maria Machado, the Nobel laureate, does walk into the presidential palace. If she does, the actual president, the real president, elected president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, whom I knew when he was a bus driver, knew when he was the foreign minister, and now know as the legitimate president of Venezuela. He will probably either be in the mountains or in the jungles or in the mountains with jungles, in Garland Nixon's peerless phrase. So this battle will continue for many years, and it will not be confined to the borders of Venezuela. There are going to be a lot of American casualties. There are going to be a lot of American losses. The international system will receive a gigantic shock to the system by the action that Donald Trump is going to declare this evening. This is blatant illegality, following on from the blatant piracy with the oil tanker earlier in the week, following on from the blatant murder of unknown rubber dinghies in the Eastern Caribbean and in the environs, not just of Venezuela, but of Colombia. This is blatant, brazen illegality. Not since Hitler declared that Poland had invaded Germany has there been a more paper-thin, transparent, translucent war of aggression, war of choice, just like so many wars of aggression and wars of choice that the United States has fought in my lifetime. In the Dominican Republic, in the whole of the Latin American continent, the United States has chosen conflict with its near neighbors, and then complained, by the way, that a significant number of refugees and illegal migrants end up on the other side of the Rio Grande. You ain't seen nothing yet, Donald. You ain't seen nothing yet on either of those two cases. We'll be discussing with Angelo Giuliani, Angelo in China, who's not in China, but in Venezuela. Bad luck for him, but at least he's able to bring you eyewitness accounts of what's happening in Venezuela as they now wait for the declaration of war, the kind of ranting, rasping declaration of war that Hitler made against his neighbors in the lifetime of some people actually watching this show tonight. There have been disturbing signs all week that the United States is slipping out of control, certainly slipping out of legality, slipping out of democratic control, slipping out of the Constitution of the American Republic, but slipping out of control in all kinds of ways. It began by the entirely unsolved murder of two students at Brown University, where the sirens weren't sounded, where the CCTV wasn't working, and where an unknown assassin entered and murdered two young people in the prime of their lives in their own classroom, in their own university, for which their parents had paid $100,000 a year in tuition fees. The Keystone Cops cannot be compared to the antics of the authorities, university, and police in Providence, Rhode Island. There has never been a more chaotic, a more shambolic, and a more utterly absurd and ridiculous response to the murder of two innocent students than we have been watching all week. The principal of the university was with his husband in Israel, but dashed back in time to completely bamboozle and confuse the parents of the children in the school, the teachers, the public. Nobody knew what the principal was saying. And we thought that was bad until we saw the police chief, until we saw the mayor, the ruling elite in an elite state of the United States, covering one of the elite Ivy League universities of the United States, were suddenly exposed as bumbling fools, and 2 children paid with their lives for it. The assassin has not been identified. He hasn't even been clearly photographed. Even in a $100,000 a year school, they had no CCTV in the building because, hey, it was the old building. They've only got CCTV in the new building. So we've no idea what this man looks like, but I have a very strong feeling that the same man murdered one of the world's top nuclear scientists in his own home in Boston, Massachusetts. The wizard professor of nuclear science of MIT was murdered, and the authorities have no idea by whom. Let me turn to one of the most profoundly disturbing, though I'll admit it had massive comedy appeal. One of the most disturbing, deranged, unhinged occasions I have ever seen in watching Donald Trump's presidency now for a total of 5 years. I thought it couldn't get any more ridiculous, and it would be a laughing matter if it weren't so deadly serious. The bull in the china shop, Donald Trump, metamorphosed in front of our eyes into the cuck in the china shop, being humped for Hanukkah by Miriam Adelson and by Alan Dershowitz, about whom more in a minute, and above all by the bear. Don't gay people have a classification of a kind of gay man? Don't they call him a bear? Well, the bear was Mark Levine. Mark Levine took charge of Donald Trump on the stage last night. He pulled him and pushed him around like he was a wimp, like he was a schoolboy, as Mark Levine hugged him, put his arm round his shoulder, arm round his neck, and told him he had the responsibility to go for 4 more years. He told Donald Trump in front of the world, "You are the first Jewish president." And Trump whimpered. "It's true. It's true," he said coquettishly. The bull became a cuck, humped for Hanukkah. And Miriam Adelson, she whispered in his ear, to him and hundreds of millions of people who now have watched it all over the world. "I've checked," she said, "with Alan Dershowitz. You can run for 4 more years. You must run. I will give you the money." She's the first lady. She's effectively the president, as her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, was in Trump's first term, according to Trump himself, who told us that Adelson had him on tap, could drop in anytime he liked, ask him for anything and receive it in exchange for $250 million. It's cheap, that, you know. I mean, it's cheap at the price. It's seriously bargain basement prices for the Golan Heights, which, as he now points out, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars because of the precious energy resources underneath it. And he says, sotto voce, to the world, I should have asked him for something in return. It's cheap at the price. for recognition of the annexation in defiance of the entire world of the holy city of Jerusalem, of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of the burial place of Christ himself. It's cheap at the price. 250 million? As Trump himself said last night, 250 million ain't what it used to be. So who's Alan Dershowitz? You may well ask. Well, he was in the room. Alan's here, said Trump. I saw Alan. Alan's in the room. Who's Alan? Alan! 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 Who is he? Well, he's only the lawyer of Jeffrey Epstein. He's only the guy who's been on 1,000 television shows defending Jeffrey Epstein's reputation. And he's only the Alan that Virginia Giuffre says in her book raped her so violently that she was bleeding from every orifice. That's Alan. That's Alan Dershowitz, whose legal advice Trump just accepted in public, on television, that he can run for 4 more years, though that will not be the last word on that matter, any more than his declaration of war on Venezuela this evening will be the last word on Venezuela. Angelo Giuliani coming up after this short break. Don't miss it.